Okay, we're moving on with our Pythagorean Theorem lessons. On the last lesson, we found that if we had a right triangle and we created a square along the side A, the area of that square would be A squared. And on our side B, if we created a square, the area would be B squared. And we found that if we then created a square, and I know that looks like a rectangle, I'm out of room. If we had a square from the side C, the area would actually end up being A squared plus B squared. Okay, if I were to take the squares from each of those each of the squares, they would combine together to create the square that we find off of the hypotenuse. Okay, so that's a little review of what we saw on our last lesson. So what we're going to look at today is using a formula. We're not going to be drawing any squares on each side. We're actually going to use the Pythagorean theorem to help us find our answers. So the way I want you to title your notes is Pythagorean Theorem, find the hypotenuse. So Pythagorean Theorem, find the hypotenuse. That's how I want you to title your notes for today. Okay. So what we're going to take a look at is the actual definition, or we're going to state the Pythagorean theorem. So that's our next step here. So right underneath, I want you to write Pythagorean theorem. In a right triangle, the square of the hypotenuse, so the square of the hypotenuse, this is an E, is equal to the square, to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. You are going to need to know this statement on the test for sure. So definitely get that copied. So hit pause and get that copied. Okay, so now continuing on to this, I don't have room here, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at this in a picture. So if I have a right triangle, my right angle is along the legs. And this is my hypotenuse. Okay. With our legs are labeled A and B, and honestly, doesn't make a difference which side is A and which side is B, as long as it's one of the sides that is touching the right angle, it's an A or a B. And then we'll go ahead and call the hypotenuse C. And that's our longest side. Okay, and our legs, technically it's called adjacent to the right angle. Okay, so copy these notes down. And our formula states that if I add the sum of my legs squared that equals the hypotenuse squared. So if I square leg A and I square leg B, and I add those two numbers together, I get the square of C. And we're going to take a look at some examples. Now, you saw this happen a lot on in the web applet that you used for your last activity. We talked about when you looked at the A, B, and C tables, when you squared the A and you squared the B and you added them together, you got the square of the C. But today we're going to take a look, no extra websites, it's just going to be straight algebra. So hit pause, get this copied. Okay, so example number 1. So example 1, we have a triangle. When you're drawing these, you definitely want to include your right angle, just in case you have a triangle that's close. And my legs are 3 and 4, and I do not know my hypotenuse length. Now, at least in this activity, if you rewrite this equation on each example, it's going to start that muscle memory in your brain, and it'll just kind of ingrain it. So you definitely, at least on these first couple examples, we're going to write down the formula, and then we're going to substitute. So my A we'll call 3. My B we'll call 4. It could have gone either direction. I do not know my C, so I keep that C squared. So my next step is going to be to square my 3 and square my 4. And then I'm going to add these together and get 25 equals C squared. Now, I don't want to know C squared, I actually want to know C. In order to find C, I need to square root C squared. If you square root a square number, you get the number. Square root of 25 is 5. I can double check it. Back at the top if you wanted to. I could say 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. And I don't copy this yellow part down, but I would say 9 plus 16 equals 25. And yes, it does. Okay. So that's a nice little way to check yourself. We don't have to do that here. The one thing I do want you to add to this example, though, are some steps written in words, just so that when you go back and look at this example, you have an idea of how it was completed. So my first step, I substituted A equals 3 and B equals 4. Then my next step is I squared the numbers. Then I found square root. And then this is my final answer. I simplified. This is the only example I'm going to have you add the explanation on, just because it will be helpful in case you're unsure how we got an answer. All right, let's take a look at another example. Okay, this next example, make our triangle look a little bit different. Okay, we'll make this side 6, this side 8, and this side is C. Oops. And we've got A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This is a B. Let's make that look a little nicer. Okay, so my A we'll call 8, my B we'll call 6. You could have gone either direction. And this is a 6, not a B. Let's fix that. equals c squared. So 8 squared is 64. 6 squared is 36. Don't know what c squared is. I don't want c squared, I want c. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to add together 64 plus 36, and I get 100. Okay, so we're not quite ready. We need to simplify that side. Now, I don't want c squared, I want c. The only way to get c is going to be to square root each side, and I get 10 equals c. If I were to want to check this, I would say 8 squared plus 6 squared equals 10 squared. 64 plus 36 should equal 100, and it does. So if you'd like to check it, that's a really good way to check it. Or you could pull up that website that we used yesterday and create the triangle and see if you got a side of 10. Okay, now we're going to take a look at an example. What happens when things don't work out perfectly? Okay, so this will be example 3. I didn't label the last one, so go back and label that. So for example 3, say this side is 10, this side is 5, and my hypotenuse is C. Okay, so my A we'll call 5, my B we'll call 10, don't know my C. So we're going to square my 5 to get 25, square my 10 to get 100, equals C squared. When I add 100 together with 25, I get 125 equals C squared. Square root each side, and I get C equals the square root of 125. Now in this case, what we're going to have to do, now you could find the approximation of that, but at this point you can go ahead and use a calculator, and you can find the square root of 125. And we want to round that to the nearest hundredth. And we won't use the equal sign. If you remember when we talked about approximating, you want to use the approximation sign, which is a little squiggly. And I'm going to make a note that says I used a calculator. And that's an A. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Oops, that's not 6, that's example 4. One leg is 12, the other leg is 3, the final leg is C. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So my A is going to be 12, my B is 3. I get 144 plus 9 equals C squared. 153 equals C squared. Square root each side. Pull out my calculator. Round to the nearest hundredth, and I get about 12.37. That's it.